Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. We start our news bulletin from the US, where the death toll from the COVID-19 has crossed 75,000 with nearly 2,500 fatalities in the last 24 hours. Globally, the number of deaths from the virus has exceeded 269,000 with over 3.8 million people infected. More in this report.
Almost all countries are lifting some restrictions as experts warn of a second wave of COVID-19 cases. Many state governors across the U.S. are disregarding White House guidelines for safely easing lockdown and letting businesses reopen. New York State has extended relief for the citizen on rent payment to encourage compliance with stay-at-home orders.
We did by executive order that I issued, a moratorium on residential or commercial evictions. You cannot be evicted for non-payment of rent related to this COVID situation. And that went through June. So nobody has been and nobody can be evicted through June, either residential or commercial.
In Russia, the number of coronavirus cases is now overtaking that of France and Germany, making it the fifth highest total. Moscow says the next phase of lockdown easing will depend on how strictly people will abide by the self-isolation rules. In Europe, the hard-hit UK will announce its plans on Sunday, but French Prime Minister says the country is ready to start unwinding its coronavirus lockdown from Monday.
Peut-être engagé ce lundi.
Given the health information recorded in recent days, the progressive lifting of lockdown restrictions can begin this Monday, May 11th. It's a new stage in the fight against the pandemic. It's a good news for France, for the French people.
Nous allons débuter lundi prochain.
Health authorities in several Arab countries say the number of cases and deaths from the disease has been rising. Meanwhile, Australia says it will ease social distancing restrictions in 4-week increments as the country starts returning to normal.
Meanwhile, the death toll from the novel coronavirus in Pakistan has risen to 599 after another 5 people succumbed to the disease. According to the Health Ministry, the total number of confirmed cases in the country has surpassed 26,000, while more than 7,500 people have recovered so far. Yesterday, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan said the lockdown to contain the coronavirus outbreak would be lifted in phases starting from Saturday. In Afghanistan, the Taliban have released another 48 Afghan soldiers as part of the peace deal signed with the US in Doha. In a tweet, a Taliban spokesperson, Suhail Shaheen, said the inmates were released from Herat province. He said the process will continue in the future. So far, the group has released nearly 175 Afghan soldiers in exchange for around 950 fighters. The two sides are required to free almost 6,000 prisoners as a prerequisite to initiate intra-Afghan talks. However, the Taliban and the Afghan government have repeatedly blamed each other for violating the peace deal. In Afghanistan, the Taliban have killed Khost police chief Syed Ahmed Babazai in a roadside mine explosion. The Ministry of Interior Affairs said Babazai was on his way to a clearing operation in Zinkhil area of Nadir Shah Kot district. It said 2 of his bodyguards were also killed in the blast. The Taliban have claimed the responsibility for Babazai's killing. In a Twitter post, spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid said the group killed 5 soldiers and destroyed an Afghan forces tank on the Kunduz highway. Chinese and the US trade representatives say good progress is being made on creating the governmental infrastructures necessary to make the Phase 1 agreement a success. In a phone call, chief negotiators agreed in spite of the current pandemic, both the countries fully expect to meet their obligations in a timely manner. The talks were held between Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, and US Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. In a statement, US Trade Representative's office said the parties also shared updates on COVID-19 and their assessments of its effects on economic growth. Meanwhile, China's Ministry of Commerce said both parties agreed to maintain communication and coordination. US President Donald Trump says Washington and Moscow must avoid a costly arms race. In a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Trump said China needs to be involved in new arms control talks. The White House said President Trump reaffirmed Washington's commitment to effective arms control that includes not only Russia, but also China. The Kremlin said Trump offered to send medical aid to Moscow to help fight the coronavirus pandemic. It said the leaders also discussed global oil markets, noting the support for the recent output cut deal between OPEC and non-OPEC producers. The US is removing 2 Patriot missile batteries and other military assets from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. A report by the Wall Street Journal says the reduction is based on assessments that Iran no longer poses an immediate risk to the US interests. The report quoted US officials as saying that Washington has already relocated 2 fighter jet squadrons. It said Pentagon is also considering winding down its naval presence in the Persian Gulf. In a statement, the Department of Defense said it routinely circulates troops and assets to address emerging threats. Spokesperson Sean Robertson said Pentagon maintains robust capabilities, including air defense, to address any Iran-related contingencies as needed. The batteries were deployed to the region following a series of attacks on the Saudi oil facilities last year. A prominent Houthi rebel commander, Mohammed Abdul Karim al-Hamran, has been killed amid fierce clashes in central Yemen. State media says al-Hamran, who commanded special forces in Marib and Beda provinces, was buried in the capital Sana'a. The UN said al-Hamran was killed during a clash with the government forces in Serwa district of Marib province. In a tweet, a delegate of Yemen to UNESCO, Mohammed Jumayi, said it was a painful blow to the Houthi militia. This comes hours after the UN called for an immediate ceasefire in Yemen, raising alarm over a surge in the number of coronavirus cases. In Libya, airstrikes with the government forces have killed at least 15 members of Khalifa Haftar's militia in southwestern Tripoli. In a statement, the government forces said air raids targeted Haftar's militia near the Al-Watia air base. This comes after the government forces claim to have recaptured the base. Meanwhile, Turkey and Italy said shells landed near their embassies in central Tripoli late on Thursday. The Turkish envoy said a missile struck the High Court building next to the embassy and another landed near the foreign ministry. In a tweet, Rome's foreign ministry said the area around the Italian ambassador's residence was hit, causing 2 deaths. Haftar's forces have been bombarding Tripoli for months as part of a year-long offensive to capture the capital, Tripoli. Japan has approved Gilead's remdesivir as a treatment for COVID-19, making it country's first officially authorized drug to tackle the disease. Japan reached the decision just 3 days after the US drug maker filed for fast-track approval for the treatment. At a briefing, a health ministry official said so far there has been no coronavirus medicine available, so it is a significant step to approve the drug. He said remdesivir will be given to patients with severe COVID-19 symptoms. Last week, the US Food and Drug Administration also authorized remdesivir for emergency use against the coronavirus. The World Health Organization said 83,000 to 200,000 people in Africa can die from the coronavirus without effective measures. In a statement, the global health body said 29 million to 44 million people can become infected in the first year of the pandemic. The organization said its research, which is based on prediction modeling, looks at 47 countries in the African region with a total population of 1 billion. It says smaller African countries alongside Algeria, South Africa and Cameroon are at high risk if containment measures are not prioritized. Africa's Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said the total number of COVID-19 cases in the continent has crossed 51,000. The UN has warned that the world is facing double pandemic as mega famines can result in disasters of biblical proportions. UN World Food Programme says crisis is at the doorstep if enough funds are not pledged to combat ripple effects of COVID-19. WFP Executive Director David Beasley said the food agency helps nearly 100 million people on any given day. He said a health pandemic will soon be followed by a hunger pandemic. He said before COVID-19, 135 million people were already on the brink of starvation. The UN has also more than tripled its funds appeal to $6.7 billion to help vulnerable countries fight COVID-19. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The death toll from the flash floods has risen to over 260 in Eastern Africa. The floods have wreaked havoc in major African countries, with Kenya, Somalia, Rwanda and Uganda being the worst hit. Uganda's Ministry of Emergency Management said at least 65 people have been swept away so far. Rwandan Red Cross Society said 55 people have died, while over 2,200 households have been affected by this year's floods. In Somalia, floods have killed 16 people. Kenya's government says flash floods, landslides and sinkholes have killed 194 so far and left thousands displaced. In the U.S., wildfires are burning parts of Florida Panhandle, destroying buildings and forcing hundreds to flee. Fire officials said at least 33 homes have been destroyed. The state officials said 2 fires are tearing through Santa Rosa and Walton counties. Officials said, spurred by high winds, the fire has burned about 2,000 acres east of Avalon Beach. They said in Santa Rosa County, that resulted in some 1,100 evacuations. So far, there have been no reports of casualties. 16 migrant workers sleeping on rail tracks have been crushed to death by a cargo train in India's western Maharashtra state. Police say one injured person was moved to Aurangabad District Hospital. They said the laborers had likely assumed the trains were not running due to the coronavirus lockdown and slept on the tracks. Police said they are trying to identify the laborers, while the railway police force is assisting in the investigation and aftermath. Millions of migrant workers started to return to native regions after the government announced a sudden lockdown to curb the spread of COVID-19. In India, at least 11 people have been killed by a gas leak at a chemical plant in the southern state of Andhra Pradesh, with about 800 others taken to hospital. This has revived memories of 1984 Bhopal gas leak, which resulted in the deaths of thousands of Indians. More in this report.
India has a long history of industrial accidents, but the Bhopal gas leak of 1984 is the worst by far. The leaking of deadly methyl isocyanate gas from a Union Carbide plant in Madhya Pradesh resulted in the deaths of over 5,000 people. Long term, it is estimated that at least 25,000 people died as a result of exposure to the leak. In fact, survivors of the incident account for the majority of COVID-19 related fatalities in the area today.
Most gas victims suffer from either lung or kidney or heart disorders. According to the past cases of coronavirus deaths across the world, people with these morbidities are a lot more likely to die of coronavirus than healthy people. That is why, as we can see that out of 14 deaths in the city, 13 were gas tragedy victims.
Now there's been similar incident at polyester factory in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Official says 11 people have died and over 300 hospitalized, with 1,500 needing to be evacuated from the area.
I also underline that we will be there till that leakage is totally plugged, and other measures to neutralize the entire chemical situation there is also being taken. So overall, the situation is under control, and I think overall we can say that now it is a question of rehabilitation and treatment of the people who have been affected.
It should be noted that there has been no justice for the victims of Bhopal gas leak to this day. Activists have found severe irregularities in funds meant as compensation for those affected by the disaster, and the area around the Union Carbide factory remains severely contaminated to this day. Such incidents show the lack of corporate responsibility in India continues to endanger the country's citizens. It remains to be seen whether management of polystyrene factory will be held accountable for the accident.
Well, leaders across Europe are marking the 75th anniversary of VE Day today, which marks the end of the World War II. Events are being held in closed ceremonies as public gatherings have been cancelled due to the coronavirus lockdown. To mark the occasion, President Macron will lay a wreath at the tomb of an unknown soldier in Paris. while German Chancellor Merkel will also lead a ceremony in Germany's Central War Memorial. In the UK, Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall will lead a 2-minute silence followed by an address from the Queen. A similar celebration, known as Victory Day, is held on May 9th in several former Soviet countries, including Russia, Ukraine and Belarus. China's new generation manned spaceship has returned to Earth. In a statement, China Manned Space Agency says spacecraft test vessel successfully landed in predetermined area of Dongfeng landing. China launched a trial version of new spaceship without a crew by Long March 5B carrier rocket from Wenchang Space Launch Center. Agency said experimental spaceship flew in orbit for 2 days and 19 hours. Agency said experimental spaceship carried out a series of space science and technology experiments. Agency said it also tested key technologies, including the heat shielding and control during its re-entry into the atmosphere. The financial services company Moody's says India is likely to see 0% expansion in the economic growth for the current fiscal year due to COVID-19. In a report, the ratings agency said the fiscal deficit is seen rising to 5.5% of the GDP against the estimated 3.5%. It said the COVID-19 spread in the country has also reduced the prospects of a durable fiscal consolidation. Moody's reiterated that the negative outlook indicates an upgrade is unlikely in the near term. The International Monetary Fund has approved a total of $18 billion so far to help dozens of countries bear the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. Head of the IMF Communications Department, Jerry Rice, said they have approved financing for 50 countries under these emergency facilities. Rice said over 100 countries requested or expressed interest in assistance from the IMF since the start of the COVID-19 crisis. The spokesperson said the fund increased access to its emergency facilities to meet an expected global demand of $100 billion. To ensure misuse of funds, he said member countries were asked to commit that the money was only being used for urgent purposes related to COVID-19. He also reiterated the IMF's call for suspension of debt service payments for the poorest countries from bilateral creditors. In the U.S., unemployment claims due to COVID-19 have surged past 33 million after 3 million more Americans sought the benefits last week. The Labor Department reveals the figures every week as the virus continues to take a toll on the economy. The report said the total number of jobless claims since mid-March is equivalent to 20% of the total U.S. workforce. The number of claims has fallen for 5 straight weeks since hitting a peak of nearly 7 million in April. The alarming figure comes just 2 months after U.S. unemployment rate reached 50-year low of just 3.5%. Google's sister firm Sidewalk Labs has scrapped a plan to build a smart city in Canada. It cited complications caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Chief Executive Dan Doctorow blamed unprecedented economic uncertainty for abandoning the plan. The vision of the project was to have a city full of technology, from self-driving cars to innovative ways of collecting garbage. The buildings were to be sustainable and built in radical new ways, and cycle lanes were to be heated. Core parts of the plan were developed together with Waterfront Toronto to build a truly inclusive, sustainable community. Reacting to this announcement, Waterfront Toronto said this is not the outcome they hoped for, but appreciated Sidewalk Labs for its vision and effort. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at News.